Welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It's so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies or challenges you faced in the past or are facing right now, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And no one I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of the show, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we are in the midst of our series, Classic Films, Classic Crucible Lessons. And we've got another, it's interesting how they kind of have come in twos, certain kinds of episodes. And here's another one about some very tough societal things that happened, but there's some great crucibles in there that we hope will bless people. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I know you are as well.
Absolutely, Gary. This will be another great discussion, a great movie in the true sense of that word. Very much looking forward to it.
And the series that I alluded to, folks, you are in the midst of, you are in part six of our series, Classic Films, Classic Crucible Lessons. And the movie that we're going to talk about, the classic film we're going to discuss, is To Kill a Mockingbird. The idea behind the series, just so you know, if this is maybe the first one you've dropped in on, is a couple of years ago, we did a series on movie heroes, sports heroes, action heroes, superheroes. And it was fun, and it was in the summer, and it was, in addition to being fun, it spotlighted some very critical lessons that we can learn from our crucibles. And that's what we're doing here. But this time, we're focusing on really classic films. These are movies that we're talking about here that are on the American Film Institute's list of 100 greatest movies from the United States. And this one we're talking about today, To Kill a Mockingbird, is number 25 on that list. So we've done so far 6 episodes of the series. This is the 6th one, and they cover movies that fall in the top 25. So that'll tell you just how seriously, when we say classic movies for this series, we mean classic movies. This is nothing lower than 25 so far have we spoken about in AFI's top 100. So I ask you all the time, Warwick, when we start, just to help people understand why we're doing this. Why are films such a great wellspring of lessons about how to move beyond your crucibles?
Movies, classic films in particular, are typically about a protagonist up against long odds or a crisis that tests their character. As we'll get into in a moment, if ever there was a movie that has a protagonist up against incredibly long odds and a very tough situation that tests their character, it's this one. We talk about crucibles all the time. This is almost crucible to the max in a sense. That's really tests somebody's character. And when faced with a crucible, and certainly in this movie, we can either rise above it and not be defined by it, or we can say, you know what, this is too tough. I'm just not going to fight this one because it's just too difficult. I probably won't win anyway. And, I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm not going to defy the trend, defy society. I'm just going to go along. And so really, crucibles, they're a test of character. Are we going to be defined by our worst day, by our crisis, by our crucible? Or are we going to find a way to rise above it and not be defined by it, to try to find some lessons amidst the crucible, to live a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others? So crucibles are a huge test for our characters and almost our souls, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to do a little bit of a trailer here, a teaser for you folks. And that is, you will see very, very clearly as we begin to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird, some of the crucibles going on in society and some of the individuals in society will become pretty evident pretty early on in our discussion. But stay tuned toward the end of this episode, because there is one crucible that we'll discuss that at first glance you won't really. Maybe it'll surprise you to know that what we're going to talk about qualifies as a crucible for one of the characters in the film. I'll say no more than that right now. But To Kill a Mockingbird, let's set the stage here. The movie was made in 1962, and it's based on Harper Lee's best-selling novel of 2 years earlier, of 1960. It's both a coming-of-age film as well as a courtroom drama. Interesting mix, and we'll talk about both of those elements and how they intersect and how they both have some crucibles within them. Its overarching theme is racism in the South in the 1930s. So there's sort of what the movie is about. Now let's get into what the beats of the film. At the center of the story is one man who, as a lawyer, battles the racial injustice of the time and works just as hard to imbue his young children with the character to rise above racism and the culture and the conventions of the time, and treating any person as less than, something else he imbues his children with. And this all takes place in the small town of Macomb, Alabama. That character is lawyer Atticus Finch, played by Gregory Peck, who won the Best Actor Oscar for his role in this film. If you watch it, you'll understand why. And he is Atticus is just a few years widowed. And in raising his young children, 10-year-old Jem and 6-year-old Scout, whose real name is Jean Louise, but her nickname is Scout, he treats them with kindness and respect from the very first time we see him interacting with them, always being authentic and honest with them. The first example of that comes before any of the big themes of the film are explored. The first example of that happens when a man named Mr. Cunningham comes to the house with a bag of hickory nuts for the Finches. Scout calls him over to give the nuts to her dad, to Atticus Finch, who she calls, by the way, she calls him Atticus too. So we can call him Atticus because Scout calls him Atticus as well. But Atticus doesn't want him to feel uncomfortable. He doesn't want Mr. Cunningham to feel uncomfortable. So he tells Scout, next time just take the nuts and because what makes him feel uncomfortable is that he can't afford his legal fees. That's how he's paying his legal fees. He's a farmer, and he's giving Atticus some of his crop, some of the things that he raises, because he can't afford his legal fees. And Atticus is so kind that he doesn't want to cause the man any embarrassment. So he says very kindly to his daughter, Scout, next time just don't introduce him to me. I mean, don't bring him to me, because I don't want him to be embarrassed. That's the kind of guy Atticus Finch is. So Warwick, that's the first sign we get that Atticus Finch is a kind man, the kind of man who believes all people, even or especially those marginalized by society, deserve equal and fair treatment. It makes audiences see him as a good man right away, doesn't it?
It really does. From very early on in the movie, you see Atticus Finch as a kind and loving dad to his two kids, Jem and Scout, in the way he treats Mr. Cunningham. Obviously, Mr. Cunningham is somebody that is having financial challenges in his life. He's having trouble paying his legal bills, but he doesn't want him to feel uncomfortable, less than.
Right.
He wants his kids to treat Mr. Cunningham with respect, and rather than rejecting the nuts, Atticus Finch realizes what he's doing. He's just doing what he can. He feels bad. He's just trying to pay something that he has, that he's probably grown. So I think we see that Atticus Finch has this grace and kindness to all people, regardless of the color of their skin. And every day, and truly in every way, Atticus Finch models what a good man, what a good person, in this case, a good father should be, a good lawyer. He is kind. He is just. The way he treats them, reasonably early on in the movie, we see that Atticus Finch is an African-American maid that features from time to time in the movie. She is treated with kindness. She's treated she's treated in a way that she feels free to help parent Atticus Finch's kids. Very unusual, I would have thought, for the time. But, she wouldn't be disciplining or giving words of wisdom to his kids if that wasn't something that she felt free to do. So it's in small ways, before we get to really the heart of the movie, Atticus Finch just really shows that he treats all people equally and kindly, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of whether they're having financial challenges or challenges of any kind. He is a good and fair man that treats people well and with respect. Not just in the large times, in the courtroom drama,
right,
but in the small everyday times. It's just he's truly a remarkable man, a remarkable character.
Yeah, and it comes through, as you said, in sort of small moments, right? The way that he does indeed interact with Calpurnia, who has the right, since Atticus's wife has passed away a few years earlier. He's given her full rights to discipline the kids and to, give them lessons and do all of that. Clearly member of the family, not just a servant in the family household. And this is 1930s in the South. So as we said, Atticus Finch has created an environment that maybe is not all across that area at that time. And the thing that leaps out for me at this moment too, Warwick, is that right after talking about getting the nuts, and Scout asks a question because the farmer who gave the nuts to them was Mr. Cunningham is poor. Scout asks, "Are we poor too, Dad?" Or Atticus, "Are we poor too?" And he says, "Yes, we are." He doesn't hide anything from his kids. Now, he's not as poor as someone who has to pay legal bills with crops from his fields, but that is just a very small bit that shows there's nothing that Atticus Finch is keeping from his kids. And that's, even in the trauma, the crucible, if you will, of having lost his wife a few years earlier, he is raising them with the right values, and he's modeling the right values to them.
Just as you're talking, we'll see more of this, but just to talk about it in general, because you raised an excellent point about not hiding things from his kids. You'll see later in the movie about how he talks about very difficult things to his kids. He doesn't say, "Look, this is not for kids. This is adult talk." Not once in the movie will you ever see him do that. He will explain in, as best he can, age-appropriate ways of what his kids are seeing, which they're having a hard time comprehending or understanding because they're kids. They haven't been as tainted by the world, if you will, and what's out there is perhaps adults. But he does not, in one sense, yes, he protects his kids, but he helps to educate his kids in the full sense of the word of what's out there in the world and what's out there in 1930s Alabama, but in caring ways that his kids can understand. That I really hadn't thought about that until you mentioned that, Gary. That is remarkable parenting.
Yes,
he may be a hero in society, but he's pretty much of a hero as a parent too. He is really doing an incredible job as a single parent.
Yeah, and we're just getting started. If you think you like Atticus Finch in the first 10 minutes of this movie, folks, you're going to like him a lot more at the end. So now we'll get in a little bit, right? The movie starts out and it focuses on that coming of age drama stuff a lot early in the film. The Finch children and a friend of theirs named Dill, which I think can only be a name in the South. There may not have been many Dills in Australia. I don't know any Dills from Wisconsin for sure. But their friend Dill, they're intrigued by a neighbor named Boo Radley, who's a recluse, who lives nearby and is the subject of gossipy lore by the townspeople and the children of the town. They say things like he eats squirrels. He scratches at doors at people's homes in the middle of the night, and that he tried to kill his own father. Those are just some of the bad sort of gossipy things that get said about Boo Radley. Then the kids are scared of him, or at least what they think he represents, and his house, which is, dark and maybe in a little disrepair. And they're just a little spooked by it all. But Atticus, recognizing this when he sees the kids over there, says this to them. He tells them to leave those poor people alone. Another example of his character exhibiting kindness. He doesn't want to see the Radleys, and he actually knows the Radleys. He knows the name of Boo. We'll tell you at the end, as we get closer to the end, what Boo's real name is. But Atticus knows them a little bit, and he's concerned that he doesn't want his kids messing with them. So when Atticus shows Scout, it's a great scene. Atticus shows Scout his pocket watch one night, telling her he's going to give it to Jem one day, and she asks, "What are you going to give me?" He says this to her: "I don't know that I have anything else of value that belongs to me." Although he does then tell her he's got some jewelry from her mom. But Warwick, that part of that scene where Atticus says, "I don't know that I have anything else of value that belongs to me." He's wrong. I mean, very, very few times in this film is Atticus Finch wrong. Here he is wrong because he has something extremely important of value to pass along to his children. And that is to respect and to look out for all people, right?
It's such a good point, Gary. Atticus Finch is really helping his kids, his children, to think differently. You can give money, possessions, homes, and depending on where you are financially, that could be a lot or a little. But really, that's not the greatest gift you can give to your kids. And the greatest gift he's giving to his kids is beliefs and values of how to treat people well, of how to fight for justice, which in 1930s Alabama, for a young, white kid, that is a defining moment. Are you going to be compliant, go with the flow, the easy route of injustice and racism? Or are you going to take a different route of fighting for justice? As, 30 years later in the 1960s in the civil rights movement, there were a number of people that went down to join African Americans fighting for civil rights. Lawyers would go down from the North. Just different folks would go down to saying, I want to join this fight. People gathered, irrespective of color, irrespective of the color of their skin, to fight for justice. Now, that's 30 years later in a different time, although still very challenging. But I think what he's modeling for his kids, Atticus Finch, and just by his whole demeanor, is just beliefs and values are the greatest legacy that we can give our kids, not just in speeches, but how we live our life.
Right.
And what's remarkable about Atticus Finch, clearly he knew how to give a good speech. You will see later his speech in the courtroom is remarkable. But the way he led his life, the way he modeled his beliefs and values for his kids was incredible. That was the greatest gift that he gave his kids. This whole movie is actually narrated by an older Scout, basically. She's looking back decades later, and she's the narrator. Well, she has learnt some powerful lessons by the way that Atticus has lived his life. So the gift that he's given his kids is incalculable. It is worth far more than any riches that the earth has. It's an incredible gift. And you're right, he doesn't really realize every day he's giving his kids incredible gifts. The gift of wisdom, of character, of true value, beliefs that can really uplift people. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And we talk a lot on this show when we're not in doing series on movies, and we're talking to guests, and you and I are having dialogues about some aspects of Beyond the Crucible. We talk a lot about how beliefs and values are so important to helping you get through, bounce forward from your crucible experiences. And what he's doing in doing that from a Beyond the Crucible perspective is he's equipping his kids for future life, right? He's equipping Scout at age 6 to be Scout a couple decades later, who's narrating this film. And that is something that we encounter all the time on this show, the importance of beliefs and values. And I think you used the word legacy there, of leaving a legacy. And that, at the end of the day, that is one of the legacies. Not the only one. Keep listening, keep watching. We'll give you the other ones, folks. But that's one of the legacies that Atticus Finch leaves is to his children, beliefs and values.
Absolutely, Gary. I think what Atticus Finch shows is how important beliefs and values are. They form your character, they form your choices, and how you make decisions in life. And that's all connected. His beliefs and values form how he treats people, his character, how he fights for justice. It's all in sync. So if people wonder what's the importance of beliefs and values, none of what you see with Atticus Finch would you see without the foundation of his beliefs and values. It governs everything he does and everything he is. So if ever there was a movie that shows why beliefs and values are important, nothing we see in this movie would have happened without the anchor of his soul that his beliefs and values are.
Good point. So, folks, the courtroom drama element of the film is then laid out when the town judge shows up to ask Atticus to defend an African-American man named Tom Robinson, who has been accused of raping a young white woman named Mayella Ewell. The judge says he knows Atticus has to focus on raising his children, as he is still a recent widower, but he also knows that Atticus is the best lawyer for this case. And to no one's surprise, who's even caught a glimpse of Atticus at the start of this movie, Atticus accepts the case. The children continue, though, despite their father's urgings, to nose around the Radley house to get a peek at Boo. But they also show their father's kindness to a poor boy at the school. Walter, the son of Mr. Cunningham, the guy who gave the farmer who gave his hickory nuts to pay his legal debt to Atticus. The boy has no money for lunch at school. So they invite him over to dinner at the Finch household. It's during dinner that the discussion turns toward typical normal dinner discussion, turns toward Atticus's father giving him his first gun. Atticus explains he was just a little older than Jem, who keeps asking for one. And Atticus conveys what his father told him about guns, that he could shoot any bird he wanted but the mockingbird, because it's a sin, he says, his father told him, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. And this is the quote that he said, because mockingbirds don't do anything but make music for us to enjoy. Don't eat people's gardens. Don't nest in the corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. This metaphor, Warwick, of a mockingbird is a key theme of this movie. Why is it so important? And why does it mean so much to Atticus?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question, Gary. I mean, the movie is called To Kill a Mockingbird for a reason. It's the theme. And really what Atticus is saying is when he was a boy, he was told he could kill other birds like blue jays, but that it was a sin to kill a mockingbird. Because as you said, all mockingbirds do is they sing for us to enjoy, and they don't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with a mockingbird. Basically, you should leave mockingbirds alone. And this was really a metaphor, as we'll see. Atticus is living in Alabama in the 1930s when people mistreated and even killed people because, frankly, of the color of their skin, and they weren't doing anything wrong. It was purely based on prejudice. So It's Atticus's way of just saying, why would you kill mockingbirds? They're not hurting anybody. They're not doing anything wrong. We do not harm mockingbirds. It's basically, you don't harm people when they're not doing anything wrong. All they're being is mockingbirds. They're just being themselves. You don't hurt people when they're not doing anything wrong. You don't hurt people just because, oh, I don't like birds. So it's really the pivotal point, really, in the movie, in a sense. And I think, Atticus Finch is clearly stating that that's wrong. Killing mockingbirds, killing people who are different than you just because they're different, hurting people, maligning them, that's just against his beliefs and values. And that's now understandable why the movie is called To Kill a Mockingbird. You don't do that. Why would you harm people that are doing nothing wrong? They're just being themselves. Why would you hate a mockingbird? It makes no sense.
That's a good point to make, Warwick, because Atticus Finch will begin to attract a little bit of dislike and even hatred himself by taking on the case of Tom Robinson. Jem and Scout, it turns out, very quickly start getting harassed at school because their father is defending Tom Robinson. Some of the other students are using ugly epithets to describe him. Scout asks her father if he is indeed what the kids at school are calling him. He responds that he simply believes everyone has a right to be treated fairly under the law and urges her to remember this. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. You have to, he says, climb inside his skin and walk around in it. The fallout of Atticus's defense of Tom Robinson takes an even darker turn when Atticus visits the Robinson home and Bob Ewell shows up to try to intimidate Atticus. He also scares Jem, who's come along with his father. Atticus tells Jem this: there's no need to fear. There's no need to be afraid of him. He's all bluff. He then tells his boy, there are a lot of ugly things in this world, son. I wish I could keep them away from you. But he can't. Warwick, Atticus is being a good parent, a good man here on two scores, isn't he? He's protecting his son, but he is also imbuing his son with a perspective that he will need to have to navigate this world that he says is full of some difficult things, right?
Atticus Finch is making such a good point and giving such a valuable life lesson to his kids when he says you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. You climb inside his skin and walk around in it. He's showing such tremendous compassion and empathy. And again, this is a white lawyer in 1930s Alabama. I mean, this is just remarkable. There is such caring and character by saying you really can't know people until you look at something or situation from his or her point of view. This is a time when many white people had no desire to understand what it was like to walk in an African American's shoes, to understand their point of view. Zero desire. At that time, African Americans were considered by many in the culture, and certainly some in the South, as less intelligent and of less worth than white people. Now, in this day and age, we've made strides. Obviously, we're certainly still not there. There's definitely still injustice and inequity. But in 1930s, African Americans, they were considered definitely less than white people, to say the least. So to say you really never understand somebody until you walk in their shoes, there are some white people who say, well, why would you want to understand? What's there to understand? They're just different. They're not like us. They're not worthy of our understanding. I mean, they would not understand what Atticus Finch is trying to say. And what's remarkable about Atticus Finch, as we've discussed, he doesn't just talk truths, talk profound wisdom. He lives that. In him making a decision, in Atticus Finch making the decision to defend an African-American man, Tom Robinson, at a time when this would be seen as not a good thing to do by many white people, that's remarkable. From, early in the movie, we see after the judge asks Atticus Finch to take the case up, he runs into Bob Ewell, the father of the woman who was, we'll see is central to this court case. Bob Ewell comes up and says, "You don't want to be taking this case. Walk away." It's before the court case starts, months before potentially, because, once it can take quite a while for a case to come to trial. So very early on, Bob Ewell makes it clear to Atticus Finch, you don't want to do this. Walk away. And I'm sure there would have been others that would say, you don't want to take on this kind of case. But Atticus Finch is going to be true to his values and beliefs. He's going to show his kids that he's a man of character. And so, and in the scene that you mentioned, he stands up to Bob Ewell. He shows his kids that he will not be intimidated as he's at the Robinsons' home. And, Bob Ewell is trying to get in his face and intimidate him. He won't be intimidated. He will do the right thing, no matter what the cost is. And, as we'll see, the cost could be considerable. So it's truly a remarkable scene in which Atticus Finch stands up for what he believes. He shows his kids what's standing up for truth, what's standing up for what's right, what's standing against racism looks like. It's truly a remarkable scene.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Warwick, you said something as you were talking about that, that Atticus tells the kids, you have to walk in someone's shoes. And what's interesting is that what he actually says, right? And I talked about it. And I think at some other point he does say walk in someone's shoes, but it's very, very, very intentional on the part of the screenwriter here that what Atticus says is you have to crawl inside someone's skin and walk around in that. Because what is the issue, the big issue of the movie, right? What Atticus does in essence is crawl inside the skin of Tom Robinson and people like Tom Robinson. He understands what true prejudice, deep prejudice they're facing. And that is what informs his ability, his desire to take this case, to fight hard for Tom Robinson, because he's done what he's told Jem and Scout to do. He has figuratively climbed inside the skin, the different colored skin of Tom Robinson, to see just exactly what someone with that skin color goes through in 1930s Alabama. And that is, I think, what it's fair to say, that's what drives him so hard to fight so hard for Tom, right?
Yeah, so very true. What fuels racism is lack of empathy, lack of desire to get in somebody else's skin. If you truly get to know somebody who's different than you, believes differently than you, has a different skin color than you, different nationality, different faith, whatever those differences are, there's been many differences throughout human history where wars have happened because people look differently, believe differently, act differently. But if you find somebody that's different than you and you try to understand them, try to empathize, try to understand what it is like to be them, it's hard to be prejudiced. It's hard to be racist because as you find, we're all human with hopes and dreams, parents, kids, you begin to see that our differences are not nearly as great as what we have in common. So empathy, compassion, truly trying to understand people who are different than you is really a huge help in combating racism. And so that's why what Atticus Finch says it's so profound. It's one of the great weapons to help combat prejudice and racism.
Right.
And obviously his kids don't quite realize, how could they, how profound what he's saying is, but it's hugely profound.
Yeah. And well, they're about to get another hint at how profound it is, because Atticus gets word that a mob is heading to the jail to lynch Tom Robinson. Atticus heads to the jail himself, all by himself, heads to the jail to defend his client, not in the legal sense, but in the physical sense. The mob shows up, a couple dozen strong. Atticus is sitting in a chair reading a book outside the jail, and he rises to meet the men. One of them is Mr. Cunningham, the farmer who paid his legal bill with nuts at the very start of the movie. But Scout disarms Mr. Cunningham by speaking to him kindly about that meeting at their house when Cunningham came to pay his legal bill, about her friendship with his son. Her kindness softens the man, who tells the other men to leave with him. Atticus's intentional parenting about treating others as you want to be treated has grown Scout's compassion and character. At the trial now, it's alleged that Tom entered the Ewell property at Mayella's request to chop up a chifforobe, and that Mayella showed signs of having been beaten around that time. One of Atticus's defensive arguments is that Tom's left arm is disabled due to a farming accident years ago. Yet the supposed rapist would have had to mostly assault Mayella with his left hand before raping her. Atticus shows that Mayella's father, Bob Ewell, is left-handed, implying that he beat Mayella because he caught her seducing the young African-American defendant. He also states that Mayella has never been examined by a doctor after the alleged rape. Taking the stand, Tom denies he attacked Mayella, but states that she kissed him against his will. He testifies that he had previously assisted Mayella with various chores at her request because he, quote, felt sorry for her, unquote. Those words incite a very swift and negative reaction from the prosecutor and a gasp from the audience. In his closing argument, Atticus asks the all-white male jury to cast aside their prejudices and focus on Tom's obvious innocence. He says of Mayella, she did something in our society that is unthinkable. She kissed a black man. Well, I'll stop talking about all that, and I'll let you folks see and hear that very impassioned speech that Atticus Finch gives in the court.
I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness for the state. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance. But my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in an effort to get rid of her own guilt. Now I say guilt, gentlemen, because it was guilt that motivated her. She's committed no crime. She has merely broken a rigid and time-honored code of our society. A code so severe that whoever breaks it is hounded from our midst, is unfit to live with. She must destroy the evidence of her offense. But what was the evidence of her offense? Tom Robinson, a human being. She must put Tom Robinson away from her. Tom Robinson was to her a daily reminder of what she did. Now, what did she do? She tempted a Negro. She was white, and she tempted a Negro. She did something that in our society is unspeakable. She kissed a black man, not an old uncle, but a strong, young Negro man. No code mattered to her before she broke it, but it came crashing down on her afterwards.
Warwick, this is a powerful scene that really spotlights the goodness and the character of Atticus Finch, isn't it? It's no wonder that in 2003, AFI, the American Film Institute, from whose list of the top 100 movies in the U.S. we're taking the films in our series, it's no wonder that AFI named Atticus Finch the greatest movie hero of the 20th century. Talk a little bit about why they did that. What about Atticus Finch is heroic?
Absolutely. This is truly remarkable, these closing scenes in this courtroom drama. What Atticus Finch is doing in that clip is he is trying to humanize Tom Robinson. It's like, what Mayella did in that society is unthinkable. She was attracted to Tom. Tom, maybe he was naive or just kind-hearted, to go around to a white woman's house and help her with things and not get paid. I mean, to go around anyway was probably dangerous, but he was just probably too kind to really think about the potential dangers to himself by doing that. But she was just attracted to him and basically kissed him, and which in that time, yes, that was unthinkable. That was breaking a code that
Right.
you never, ever had, black men or black people and white people mix like that and have any kind of romantic or physical relations. And so once that happened, there were severe consequences because of her father, Bob Ewell, and society. But, this whole episode, these closing arguments, it shows that Atticus Finch, he was willing to do the right thing no matter what. I mean, defending a black man who was accused of raping a white woman, that's about as bad as it could really get in that society. That's unthinkable. That was seen as completely unacceptable. You don't defend a black man that does that. That was completely wrong and unacceptable. But Atticus Finch does not back down, and he defends Tom Robinson brilliantly. He makes it clear that any impartial jury, he believes, would not believe that Tom Robinson did what he was accused of, and the evidence doesn't add up. Tom Robinson has, an injured left hand. It was clear from the assault that a left-handed person would probably have made the assault. To strangle somebody, you probably need, I would gather, two good working hands. Bob Ewell is left-handed. The whole thing makes no sense. There's more than enough evidence, if you will, to at the very least say that there's reasonable doubt and he shouldn't be convicted. There's no medical evidence of rape. I mean,
Right.
If there really was rape, wouldn't you think Bob Ewell said, okay, we need justice, we need the doctor to come around, even in the 1930s? It's like, that would help his case. But it's very telling that he didn't do that. Another remarkable piece of that closing argument is Atticus Finch says, what we have is basically a black person, Tom Robinson, against two white people, Bob and Mayella Ewell. He says the accusers were counting on people thinking that all black people lie and are not to be trusted. And Atticus says this is a lie. He is appealing to that all-white male juries. He's appealing to their better angels. He's saying that's not true. He's saying he believes that they can get a fair trial. So Atticus says he is confident the jury will do the right thing. He says, in the name of God, do your duty. In the name of God, believe Tom Robinson. So Atticus Finch is standing up for what's right. He's standing up for justice in an environment where it was absolutely not easy to get justice. To get justice for a black man accused of raping a white woman, the chances of getting justice there were probably close to zero. They're going to assume the black person who they were prejudiced against is going to have done it, and the evidence doesn't really matter that much. The accusation is all you need to know. Nothing else to see here. That's the environment he's working in. And what's also interesting is we see Atticus's son, Jem, is watching all this from the balcony. Now, ironically, back then, because of segregation and all, there you have white people in the courtroom down below. Well, the balcony is comprised of all African Americans, including an African American pastor. And there's Jem sitting amongst them, just watching what's happening below. Hugely powerful lesson for his son. And, for anybody that has ears to hear and eyes to see, a powerful lesson for the people in that courtroom and the society at the time.
Yeah. And right, despite everything that you just said, everything that we saw in that clip, Tom Robinson is found guilty. Not surprisingly, given what we know about the environment that we've discussed. But Tom Robinson is found guilty. And one of the most moving scenes for me, Warwick, in the film is Atticus collects all his papers and he says to Tom Robinson, we're going to file an appeal, collects his papers, heads out of the courtroom. And as he does, all of the African Americans that you described who were sitting up by segregation had to sit in the balcony of the courthouse. All of them rise to their feet and show their honor to Atticus Finch as he leaves. You mentioned that Jem was there. Scout's there too, lying down, and the pastor says to Scout, Miss Jean Louise, stand up. Right, your father is leaving the courtroom. That respect that they have for Atticus really, for me, is one of the most moving and meaningful scenes in the film.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. The African American people that are in the balcony, they know exactly the society they live in. Obviously, they have no illusions about the prejudice and racism. It's an everyday crucible and everyday trauma. And so to see an educated white lawyer defending a black man accused of rape, they know that that's dangerous for him. At the very least, he's standing in society, which sounds trivial to talk about, but, for somebody like Atticus Finch means something. He could be ostracized. How easy will it be for him to get future cases? He's not a wealthy man. He has 2 kids depending on him. I mean, all of these things, they fully realize what he's doing is very dangerous. And so to see him doing what he's doing, and they see Atticus Finch treating Tom Robinson like a human being, somebody worthy of love, care, and compassion, somebody worthy of justice, of righteousness. Just that the scene where they're standing, they're showing him by their silence and just their respect, how much they admire. Those spectators, those African-American spectators in the balcony, they don't take anything for granted that Atticus Finch is doing. They fully realize the impact and how important it is to say he's confident in the appeal. This is 1930s Alabama in the South. You're going to get a fair group of judges that are going to overturn this on the evidence. I mean, I think that's naive. Most people looking back now would say that's naive, but you got to admire his compassion, his belief that somehow he was going to be able to find a way to get Tom Robinson off of these charges and find him not guilty.
One of the things that really strikes me about what you've just been discussing is the metaphor of the mockingbird, and how really what Atticus Finch has done here is he's, in the metaphor, the guy with the gun. He could shoot the mockingbird, but he doesn't, because he understands the mockingbird's not doing anything bad, wrong, evil, even disturbing. He is, that to me, just sort of stuck out, and it speaks to a scene that comes right after that, or not long after that. And it's a very short scene that follows the verdict, but the Finch's neighbor, Maudie, tells Scout something about her father that really frames nicely the crucible of Atticus Finch's life. One he has borne with honor and integrity and without, being burdened by it. He has not tried to run away from this, in our language, crucible. And this is what Maudie says to Scout about her dad. Some men in this world are born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of those men. That really is the crucible of Atticus Finch's life, and he's not trying to run away from it. He's not even trying to really move beyond it. He's embraced it. I mean, how does that scene really summarize, Warwick, the crucible Atticus Finch willingly carries in To Kill a Mockingbird?
Yeah, just that phrase that Maudie says, a neighbor of theirs, it says to Scout, as you say, some men in this world are born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of those men. And as we've been saying, this is an unpleasant job to defend a black man accused of raping a white woman. It could be very damaging to his career. And as we'll see, it could be very damaging just for the safety of his family. Some would view it as him selling out his race, his kind, his people. But kind of what's interesting is there might be others, some white people, who would applaud what Atticus Finch is doing. Certainly Maudie, the neighbor, is. Now, those white people may feel like, well, we don't really want to talk about it much because we don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be attacked. But we applaud what Atticus Finch is doing because we believe black people are human like us, and they deserve justice and care and empathy. But it was tough to have that position in society at the time because there were many that would just accuse you of somebody that would, love black people and, used all sorts of terrible racial epithets to make that point.
Right.
So not easy being a white person back then who thought that this was wrong. You tended to keep your head down and just let it go on. And so there was probably quite a few white people who's secretly cheering and applauding what Atticus is doing, saying, I wouldn't want to do that, but thank you for doing it. Right.
And the movie's not over yet. In fact, it begins to build to its very invigorating climax. There's some things we haven't forgotten, folks, about the coming of age part of the film, and these two parts of the film are going to come together here. When Atticus arrives home, the sheriff tells him Tom was killed during his transfer to prison, supposedly, underline supposedly, while attempting to escape. Atticus goes to the Robinsons to inform them of Tom's death, accompanied by Jem. Bob Ewell appears and spits in Atticus's face. There's a great scene. That scene is great work because when Bob Ewell spits in his face, Atticus takes a step forward and you don't know what he's going to do. If you didn't know who Atticus Finch was, you wouldn't know what he was going to do. But what he does, he steps forward and stops. Then all he does is take his handkerchief out and wipe his cheek down, right? He literally turns the other cheek when Bob Ewell attacks him by spitting in his face. And so autumn arrives and Scout and Jem attend an evening school Halloween pageant in which Scout portrays a ham. We're not making this up. Watch the movie. Scout portrays a ham in the Halloween pageant. After the pageant, Scout is unable to find her dress and shoes, forcing her to walk home with Jem while wearing the large, hard-shelled costume. While cutting through the woods, Scout and Jem are attacked. Scout's cumbersome costume protects her but restricts her vision. The attacker knocks Jem unconscious, but is himself attacked and killed by a second man, unseen by Scout. Scout escapes her costume and sees the second man carrying Jem towards their house. Scout follows them and runs into the arms of of a frantic Atticus. Still unconscious, Jem has his broken arm treated by Dr. Reynolds. Scout tells the sheriff and her father what happened, then notices a strange man behind Jem's bedroom door. Atticus introduces Scout to Arthur Radley. Remember, folks, I said we were going to get to what Boo's real name is. Arthur Radley, whom she knows as Boo. It was Boo who rescued Jem and Scout, overpowering Bob Ewell and carrying Jem home. The sheriff reports that Ewell, apparently seeking revenge for Atticus humiliating him in court, is dead at the scene of the attack. Atticus mistakenly assumes Jem killed Ewell in self-defense, but the sheriff realizes the truth. Boo killed Ewell defending the children. However, he insists on declaring, the sheriff does, that Ewell simply fell on his knife, refusing to drag the painfully shy and introverted Boo into the spotlight for his heroism. This scene, Warwick, between the sheriff and Atticus is one of the more powerful scenes in the movie. The sheriff does something surprising, shocking even. Talk about that a little bit.
So I think what we were talking about, saying Atticus Finch taking a stand, defending Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping a white woman, Mayella Ewell, there are consequences. Economic consequences would be obviously likely, finding it hard to find cases that he could take on. People wouldn't bring them to him. But there can also be other consequences. We see that Bob Ewell is so bitter about, Atticus defending a black man that he tries to kill his kids. Now, this is despite the fact that Tom Robinson, he's dead. You would have thought Bob Ewell would be like, okay, Tom Robinson's dead. I don't like the fact that Atticus Finch tried to get him off, but he's dead. But yet still this bitterness about a white lawyer trying to defend a black man accused of rape. It's so deep, he's willing to try to hurt his kids, try to kill them. I mean, it's just staggering. So we have this scene here, a redemptive scene, not so much for Atticus Finch. He spent his whole life fighting for justice and defending the defenseless. But here you have a sheriff who, could easily have charged Bo for what happened, or saying, well, it might have been self-defense, but let the courts, rule. But the sheriff, in a way, was happy for this whole incident to be portrayed that Ewell killed himself. And the sheriff says this. He says, there is a black man killed for no reason. Now the man responsible for it is dead. Let the dead bury their dead this time, Mr. Finch. What the sheriff is, in a sense, saying by this is that what happened to Tom Robinson, a black man accused of rape, was unjust, was wrong. He didn't deserve to be found guilty. Still less did he deserve to be killed. And in a sense, he feels that Bob Ewell got what he deserved. Maybe there was a measure of justice from the sheriff's perspective. And he also shows compassion on Boo. Boo, was seen as the scary person who there were rumors that his dad was considering putting him in an asylum, but decided not to. People were scared, or kids were certainly scared if they went around Boo's house. But it turns out Boo was just this shy, kind man who came to the kids' defense. And we see just right after the scene, Scout saying to her dad, Atticus Finch, the sheriff was right. It would indeed be like shooting a mockingbird to try to bring this poor man in court, even if he got off because of self-defense, which in this case, it's one white man against another. Truth be told, I have a feeling that the town didn't have a huge amount of love lost towards Bob Ewell. He didn't come across as a particularly nice guy. So, kindly and timid, Boo, in this particular case, Boo might have, even if he was accused of a crime, might have actually had a decent shot of getting justice, ironically. But just the whole trauma that would have put him through, the sheriff had compassion, and Scout is right. It would indeed be like shooting a mockingbird to even bring this to court. So here we see the sheriff, obviously belatedly, doing the right thing. And in some sense, there's some, modicum of justice for Tom Robinson after the fact. But so maybe some small amount of redemption, if you will, with the sheriff acknowledging that what was done was wrong. And Bob Ewell, who really caused all this by bringing all this up, he gets, I suppose, in some people's eyes, some measure of justice.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, it's not right by the letter of the law, the quote unquote right thing to do. And yet in the context of this movie, given that Atticus Finch, although his initial impulse is to, say, okay, we're going to have to bring him before the courts, Atticus comes to see the justice in this. And I think, if in the economy of this film, that is the just outcome for all the reasons that you just described, which I think makes it an even more compelling story in that, yes, Atticus Finch defended Tom Robinson to the best of his ability, passionately, but he also recognizes that the guy he knows as Arthur Radley, everybody else calls Boo, has saved his children and does not deserve to be dragged out into the spotlight for no good reason. And Tom Ewell's death, not a good reason to drag him out, given what Tom Ewell was trying to do. So. I always ask you this question at the end of these episodes in this series, Warwick, because there's a lot of points. So it's hard for you, I bet, to drill down to what the big one is that you want to leave people with. But I'll ask the question anyway. What is the big point, the big aha out of this movie? The one thing you hope listeners and viewers take away from To Kill a Mockingbird?
We see in this movie Atticus Finch standing up for justice in a culture that largely believes that one segment of society, African Americans, don't deserve justice. Some in 1930s Alabama in the South view African Americans as less than human and therefore, by definition, don't deserve justice. It's hard for us to understand in this day and age how you could view anybody as less than human. From a faith perspective, we believe that all men and women are created equal, that we're all created in God's sight. It's abhorrent to our faith and to, I would say, most people's faith to believe that there's any such concept as less than from one human being to another. But that was 1930s Alabama. That was 1930s the South. That was, a pre-1960s civil rights era perspective. And going against the code that there were differences between white and black people, that black people don't deserve justice, there were severe consequences. I mean, Atticus Finch's kids, they were almost killed because Atticus broke that code, defending a black man accused of raping a white woman. And again, it can't be stated as too many times. There were a few crimes you could commit, if you will, crimes in quotes that would be considered more heinous than defending a black man who is accused of doing it. And back then, accusation is all you needed. Accusation meant conviction. We have, a jury of white men. The evidence was irrelevant. He was always going to be convicted in that time. So I think more broadly, this movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, it shows the impact that Atticus Finch had and that one person can have. Now, obviously, Atticus Finch may not have been able to save Tom Robinson either of being convicted or when he was taken to another location of him supposedly, as you say, running away and then being shot by the police. Atticus Finch may not have been able to save Tom Robinson, but he had an impact on those around him. He had an impact on the sheriff, on probably a number of white people in that town and society, and especially his kids.
Right.
You know, it's no wonder that Atticus Finch, as you said, Gary, was named the greatest movie hero of the 20th century by AFI. It's hard to really understate how much courage Atticus Finch had, both for his physical safety, for his livelihood, for his kids. We use this phrase a lot of doing the right thing no matter what. It was a huge thing that Atticus Finch did. It was a huge endeavor, a huge and noble task, but he did. And you can't understate also the impact. It would be hard to find anybody else that would do what Atticus Finch did, because every white person would know the consequences of doing it. And everybody would say, not me. Glad that you're doing it, but not me. Everybody's stepping back. Everybody's saying, no, not me. I'm not going there, because they know what can happen to you. And so it just shows you the impact of one man, one woman, one person of courage. It can have generational impact. It can have a legacy that will live on for many years and many generations. So it is no wonder that Atticus Finch is seen as the greatest movie hero of the 20th century. Well deserved.
Indeed. That will bring the closing credits to another episode of Classic Films, Classic Crucible Lessons. This is part 6 on To Kill a Mockingbird. Before we go, though, let me, as we do in every episode, let me give you a question to reflect on, both on the movie and on what we've discussed about the movie. And that question is this. It comes in part from the movie. What's a moment in which you climbed inside the skin of another person to better understand their perspective on something? What was the result? And this is critical. What was its impact? So spend some time. You've got a week until the next time we're together. Spend some time, ponder that question, see where it takes you. Where we'll take you is to the end of the show now, folks, but fear not, we'll be back next week, and we will save a seat for you. Welcome to a journey of transformation with the Beyond the Crucible assessment. Unlike any other, this tool is designed to guide you from adversity to achievement. As you answer a few insightful questions, you won't just find a label like the helper or the individualist. Instead, you'll uncover your unique position in the journey of resilience. This assessment reveals where you stand today, the direction you should aim for, and crucially, the steps to get there. It's more than an assessment. It's a roadmap to a life of significance. Ready? Visit beyondthecrucible.com. Take the free assessment and start charting your course to a life of significance today.